My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter with an AirDrop notification at 8:47 on a Thursday evening. I almost declined it without looking. I get spam AirDrops occasionally. Everyone does. The random public ones from strangers at the grocery store or the gas station. And my reflex when I don't recognize the sender is to hit decline and move on. But I recognized the sender name. It said, Natalie's iPhone. Natalie is my wife. She was standing in the living room, 10 feet from where I was sitting, looking at her phone with the specific concentration of someone composing something. She wasn't looking at me. She had no idea what her phone had just done. I accepted the AirDrop. 3 photos came through. I looked at the first one, then the second. Then I put my phone face down on the counter very carefully, and I sat there for a moment, and I thought about the 8 years of marriage that existed between the person in those photos and the person I thought I knew. Then I picked the phone back up and I looked at all 3 again, because I needed to be sure I'd understood what I was looking at, and I had understood correctly, and I put it down again and I said, "Hey." She looked up from her phone. "Yeah, your AirDrop is on," I said. Something moved across her face. Just a flicker. The specific micro-expression of someone whose brain has registered a problem before the rest of them has caught up. She looked at her phone. She looked at me. "Did you accept it?" I said, "Yeah." She went very still. "My name is Daniel. I'm 43 years old. I sell residential real estate in Savannah, Georgia, have been doing it for 14 years, which in this market means I've seen the full cycle of everything the coastal Georgia housing market can produce, from the years when nothing moved to the years when houses sold before the sign was in the ground to the current moment, which is something in between. I'm good at what I do in the specific way that comes from a long time of paying attention to what people actually want versus what they say they want, from learning to read the gap between the stated preference and the real one. I show people houses and I listen to what they say and I pay attention to what they do. And the information lives in both places and you have to track both simultaneously. Her name is Natalie. She's 40, works in hotel management. She's the general manager of a boutique hotel on West Charlton Street in the historic district. A 16-room place that caters to the specific kind of traveler who wants Savannah but doesn't want a chain, who wants to be in a house from 1847 with updated plumbing and excellent coffee service. She'd been in hospitality for 15 years, had worked her way from front desk to management with the methodical competence of someone who understood that the industry rewards people who solve problems before guests know problems exist. She ran the hotel the way she ran our house, with precision and grace and the specific quality of someone who was always 3 steps ahead of whatever was about to happen. We met in 2016 at a charity auction in the Starland District, a neighborhood arts fundraiser, the kind of Savannah event that happens in a converted warehouse and involves local wine and people who care about the neighborhood and people who are there because someone else cared about the neighborhood and they got dragged along. I was in the second category. She was in the first. We ended up bidding against each other on the same item, a weekend stay at a bed and breakfast on Tybee Island. And she won, and I said something gracious about it. And she laughed and said, "If you'd gone higher, I would have quit anyway. I just didn't want you to know that." I asked if that meant she wanted me to ask her to dinner instead, and she said it was possible. I asked. She said yes. We got married in October 2017 at a venue on Jones Street, one of the most photographed streets in Savannah, the kind of block with Spanish moss and townhouses and the specific beauty of a city that has been beautiful for so long it stopped noticing. 60 guests. An outdoor ceremony in the October light that was warm enough to be comfortable and cool enough to be pleasant. The specific weather window that Savannah occasionally offers in the fall, and that feels like a gift when it arrives. Her mother cried. My father danced badly and was proud of it. I stood at the end of the aisle and watched Natalie walk toward me in the afternoon light, and I thought, 8 years from now, I will still think this was exactly right. 8 years later, on a Thursday evening in March, I was sitting at my kitchen counter having accepted an AirDrop I wasn't supposed to receive, and I was revising that assessment. We live in a house on Habersham Street, the kind of older Savannah home that has more character than square footage and that requires ongoing maintenance, and that you either love for what it is or resent for what it demands, and we'd always loved it. Natalie had made it look the way it looked. She had an eye for historic spaces, for what to keep and what to update and what to leave alone, and the house reflected her judgment in every room. 8 years of a shared home. 8 years of her decisions everywhere I looked. my flaw. And I'm going to be honest about it because the honesty belongs here, is that I'm better at reading other people than I am at being read myself. I'm a good listener in the professional sense, the attentive to what's beneath the surface sense, and I've sometimes applied that quality outward so thoroughly that I've neglected to apply it inward. Natalie had said once that I was the most perceptive person she knew about strangers and the least perceptive about myself, and she'd said it with affection, and I'd laughed, and I'm thinking about that observation now with a different kind of attention. The first sign was in November. Natalie had mentioned a name over dinner, Marcus, a contractor she'd brought in for some renovation work at the hotel. The hotel had been doing a gradual refresh of several rooms, the kind of rolling update that boutique hotels do to stay current without closing entirely, and Marcus Vane had apparently been recommended by someone in the hospitality network she was part of. He was local, she said, had been doing commercial interior work in Savannah for about 6 years, had a small crew, good reputation, understood historic buildings, which in Savannah was a non-negotiable quality because the city had specific requirements about what you could and couldn't do to a property of a certain age. She mentioned him in the professional tone she used for contractor relationships, the efficient summary of someone who manages vendor relationships the way she managed everything, clearly, without excess detail. I registered the name and moved on. In December, she mentioned him again, this time in the context of a specific issue they'd had with a medallion ceiling in one of the updated rooms, a historical detail that had required a particular approach, and she described the solution Marcus had found with a specificity that told me she'd been paying attention to his work in more than a supervisory way. Not enthusiasm exactly, more like familiarity. The difference between describing someone's work and describing the person through their work. I noticed this, and I set it aside in the way that I set things aside when I'm not ready to examine them, which is a habit I've been confronting since March. January was when the phone shifted. I'll describe it briefly because the pattern is the pattern. Natalie had always had an easy, open relationship with her phone in my presence, the naturalness of someone with nothing to curate. In January, a new quality appeared. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just the slightly increased intentionality of someone who had started thinking about their phone as a thing to be managed rather than a neutral object. I noticed it the way you notice a change in someone you've lived with for 8 years, by feel rather than by sight. I told myself I was reading into it. I was in the middle of a stretch of difficult sales. January is always slow in Savannah, the winter tourist pause, and my commission income was running low, and I was carrying more general anxiety than usual, and anxious people read things into things. I assigned my noticing to the anxiety, and I moved on. February brought the working late evenings. The hotel was Natalie's responsibility, and hotel management is not a 9-to-5 profession. She'd always kept irregular hours, had always stayed late for events or operational issues, had always come home at times that varied based on what the building needed that day. So working late in February was not inherently notable. What was notable was the frequency. 4 times in February she'd come home after 9, which was on the higher end of her usual range. And what was notable was that she came home from these late evenings in a specific way. I've been trying to describe this accurately because the description matters. She didn't come home disheveled or guilty or evasive. She came home calm, more calm than the late evening warranted. The specific calm of someone whose nervous system has recently settled rather than someone who has just come from a long and demanding work session. It's a small distinction. After 8 years, you know what your person's various calms feel like. I noticed it in February, and I chose the comfortable interpretation, which was that she was getting better at decompressing from work stress, and that I should be glad. I'm a realtor. I know about staging. I know how a thing can be presented to look like what it isn't. I knew all of this, and I still chose the comfortable interpretation, which tells you something about what we're willing to not see when the alternative is too large. March was when I stopped being able to maintain the choice. The renovation at the hotel extended into new areas, and Marcus's name was coming up more frequently in the ordinary conversation of Natalie's workday. Not suspiciously, in the flat context of project management, but with a regularity that had accumulated from November to March into something with weight. The name had gone from a new mention to a fixture of her work vocabulary, the way certain recurring characters in someone's professional life graduate from introduction to established presence. Marcus said this. Marcus is handling that. Marcus found a solution. Not every day, but enough days that the name had its own groove in our conversations. There was a Wednesday evening in late February when the accumulation became something I couldn't keep distributing across plausible explanations. I was making dinner, a pasta thing I made every few weeks, the specific recipe I'd learned from my mother, and that required enough attention to be absorbing, but not enough to crowd out other thinking. And I was cooking, and I was thinking about Marcus the contractor in the way you think about a thing you've been not thinking about, which is to say with the full force of having been suppressed. I was standing at the stove, and I thought, I have been giving this situation the benefit of the doubt for 4 months. The benefit of the doubt is a finite resource, and I have almost used mine up. I thought about asking Natalie directly. The question existed. It had been existing since at least January, fully formed, waiting to be said out loud. I thought about saying it that evening, when she came home, at the kitchen table where we ate dinner and talked about our days in the ordinary architecture of a long marriage. I didn't say it. I told myself I needed more than a feeling, that feelings without evidence were just feelings, that a real estate agent who made offers based on feelings without market data was a bad real estate agent, and that the same principle applied. I needed something more concrete before I was willing to blow up 8 years. 3 weeks later, I got something more concrete. Or rather, Natalie gave it to me without meaning to. I want to describe the AirDrop sequence in detail because the detail is the thing. Natalie was in the living room. I was at the kitchen counter about 10 feet away, scrolling through listing updates on my laptop, the end-of-evening wind-down of a realtor's day. She was on her phone, absorbed, the specific posture of someone composing a message. She'd been on her phone for about 15 minutes. The AirDrop notification appeared on my phone at 8:47 p.m. Natalie's iPhone wants to share. I almost declined it. My thumb was already moving toward decline when I registered the sender name, and I stopped, and I accepted it. 3 photos. The first was a screenshot of a text conversation. I won't reproduce the specific content here, but the content was enough. The specific vocabulary of 2 people who are beyond the professional and somewhere that required its own private language, the kind of intimacy that has its own shorthand, the kind you develop when you've been talking to someone in a way you're not supposed to be talking to them for long enough that the language condenses. The name at the top of the conversation was Marcus. The second was a photo that she'd received. A photo of the hotel, one of the rooms being renovated, but not a work photo. The framing and the timestamp and the specific quality of it said, "I'm in this space, and I'm thinking about you." The third was a photo she'd taken. I recognized our house in it. The front hallway, the specific angle from the staircase, taken on a day I'd been at a showing. It was the kind of photo you take when you want to share where you are with someone who has never been there, or who you're thinking about while you're there. The caption she'd typed and not yet sent said, "The house. Been thinking about you here all day." She hadn't sent it yet. She'd been composing it when her phone had, through the proximity of our devices and the particular settings that govern AirDrop on a shared home network, delivered it to my phone instead. Technology. It'll get you every time. I put my phone down. I sat there for a moment. I said, "Hey." She looked up. "Yeah. Your AirDrop is on." The flicker. The look at her phone. The look at me. "Did you accept it?" "Yeah." She went still. What happened next happened slowly, which surprised me. I'd always imagined confrontations as things that moved fast. Raised voices, slammed doors, the dramatic acceleration of a scene that's been building. This one moved like water finding a level. Natalie walked from the living room to the kitchen. She sat down across from me at the counter. She put her phone on the counter between us. She looked at me. "Okay," she said. "Just that." "Okay," I said back. "What did you?" She stopped. "How many?" "3. She nodded. The nod of someone taking inventory of a situation. "Marcus Vane," I said. "Yes." "The contractor." "Yes." I looked at the phone on the counter between us. The photo of our hallway she'd been about to send. "Been thinking about you here all day." "How long?" I said. She pressed her lips together. "Since January." "That's the when it became what it is." "What was it before January?" She looked at her hands. "November. When the renovation started." It started as professional." "Yes." "And then it wasn't." "When did it become not?" "December." She said it to the counter. "December." When she described his work with a familiarity that had registered as something and that I'd chosen to not register. I'd had the information in December, and I'd chosen to redistribute it across acceptable explanations. "Is he married?" I said. "Divorced. 2 years ago." "Does he know about me?" "Yes." The house. Everything. Yes. I looked at our kitchen. 8 years of this kitchen. The specific coffee maker she'd researched for 3 weeks before buying. The herbs in the window she'd been growing since the first spring. The color on the walls she'd chosen and that I'd thought was wrong, and that was exactly right. The photo you were about to send, I said, of the hallway. She closed her eyes. You were going to send him a photo of our house. I know. And tell him you'd been thinking about him here all day. She didn't say anything. In our house, Natalie. I know. Said quietly. I know how that sounds. Tell me how it sounds. Tell me how you describe that. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. The specific quality of someone holding it, because losing it would be something she'd done, and this situation didn't belong to her feelings. It sounds like someone who went somewhere she shouldn't have gone, she said, and who made it worse by every decision after the first one. Are you in love with him? The silence. Natalie. I don't. She shook her head. Something that feels like, she stopped. Yes. Something that feels like that. I know that's the worst possible answer. Is it over between you? She looked at the phone. I've tried to end it twice. Since January. And I didn't. I sat with that. 2 attempts that hadn't held. 2 months of trying and not managing, which told me something about the weight of what she was carrying and something about the weight of what I was going to have to carry. I need you to go somewhere tonight, I said. I need you to call your sister or whoever you can call, and I need to be in this house. She looked at the house around us. The house she'd taken a photo of while thinking about him. Okay, she said. Before you go, I said. I need to know one thing. She waited. Did you want me to find out? She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved through her face that I'd been a realtor long enough to recognize. The expression of someone who has just been asked a question that names something they haven't named to themselves. I don't know, she said. Maybe. She stopped. I've been waiting for something to decide it for me. Because I couldn't decide it myself. And your phone decided it. She looked at the phone between us. Apparently. She called her sister. She packed a bag with the specific efficiency of someone who had, at some level, been preparing for this possibility, which was its own information. She stopped at the front door. I'm sorry, she said. I know that's nothing right now, but I want you to know I know that. I know you know it, I said. She left. I sat at the counter where I'd been sitting when the notification appeared. I looked at my phone. I looked at the 3 photos still in my camera roll. I thought about everything I'd noticed since November and everything I'd chosen not to act on. The feelings without market data. The benefit of the doubt. I've been a realtor for 14 years. I know that the listing price and the actual value of a thing are different numbers, and that the gap between them is where all the important information lives. I knew about the gap since December. I'm writing this 4 days after the Thursday. I've slept approximately 12 hours total. Tax season is someone else's problem, but closing season is about to start and houses don't sell themselves, and I have clients who don't know what's happening on Habersham Street, and that's probably how it should be. Biscuit. No, wait, wrong story. I don't have a dog. I have a house that feels very large for one person and a phone with 3 photos in the camera roll that I haven't deleted and haven't looked at again. I don't know what I'm going to do with any of it yet. I said I'd update. Here it is. The comments were more than I expected, and I read through most of them over several nights when the house was doing the specific thing that houses do when the number of people in them changes. Some of it helped. Some of it was anger on my behalf that I understood but couldn't quite use. One person wrote, the detail about her phone deciding it for her when she couldn't decide it herself is the most human thing in this whole post. She'd been waiting for something outside herself to make it real. I've been thinking about that since because I think it's exactly right, and because understanding it doesn't make it easier and also somehow does. Here's what happened. Natalie has been at her sister Claire's house in the Ardsley Park neighborhood for 19 days. Claire is 37, married, has 2 kids under 6, and lives in one of the older bungalows on Washington Avenue that she and her husband have been renovating gradually for 3 years. She received Natalie with the specific pragmatism of an older sister who has already had opinions about the situation and been waiting for an occasion to have them heard. I know this because Natalie mentioned in one of our conversations that Claire had been direct in a way that had been difficult to receive, which I take as evidence that Claire said the right things regardless of difficulty, which has always been Claire's quality and which I've always respected. The house on Habersham Street is mine and Natalie's, joint mortgage, both names, the full architecture of a shared financial life that doesn't simplify because the personal life is complicated. I've spoken to an attorney named Patricia who has an office on Bull Street 2 blocks from Forsyth Park, and she gave me a clear and unsentimental account of my options and my position without editorializing about which option I should choose. I'm staying in the house. Natalie is at Claire's. The mortgage continues. The herbs in the kitchen window are still growing because I've been watering them, which is irrational and which I've decided is fine. I told my business partner first. Her name is Sandra. We've shared an office on Drayton Street for 7 years, and she has the specific quality of someone who has been through enough of her own difficult things to receive other people's without making them into a performance. She came in on the Monday after the Thursday, and she looked at me and she said, "What happened?" Not a question, a statement that knew the answer was something and was making room for it. I told her the outline. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I'm going to handle the Hendersons' closing. You focus on the Martins. They need more hand-holding anyway." That was the entirety of her practical response, and it was everything I needed. My parents found out when I called my mother on a Sunday. She and my father have been married for 44 years, which means she came at the situation with a specific orientation toward the marriage being worth preserving that I had to gently navigate around before she'd hear the rest of what I was saying. She said, "Have you thought about?" And I said, "Mom, let me tell you what happened first." She listened. When I was done, she said, "Oh, Daniel, just that." Then she said she'd like to come up from Brunswick, and I said give me a few weeks, and she said she'd wait. Natalie's family. Her parents are in Charleston, a 3-hour drive, and they apparently found out from Claire before Natalie had a chance to tell them herself, which created a complication in the family communication that Natalie mentioned to me with the tone of someone managing multiple simultaneous fires. Her father called me directly. A brief call, careful and uncomfortable, the call of a man who has known me for 8 years and is trying to figure out what he owes me versus what he owes his daughter. He said, "I don't know what to say, Daniel." I said, "You don't have to say anything." He said he was sorry anyway. I believe he meant it. The complication nobody predicted. Marcus Vane came to the hotel. About 10 days after everything came out, after Natalie had told him it was over, which she'd done the morning after she went to Claire's, he came to the hotel on a Friday afternoon, apparently to collect some equipment from the renovation. This was legitimate. He had materials there, but the timing and the manner of it were apparently not entirely about the materials, and the assistant manager on duty had called Natalie to let her know, and Natalie had called me. She called me instead of handling it herself, which is the thing I've been thinking about since. She called me and said Marcus had shown up at the hotel, and she wasn't there, and she didn't know what to do, and she was telling me because she thought I should know. I asked if she wanted me to go to the hotel, and she said no. She'd call the assistant manager back and handle it. I said okay. She handled it. Why she called me with it rather than Claire or someone else? I've turned this over. I've landed in the place where I think it was honest rather than strategic, that she called me because I was the person she called when things were complicated, the 8-year reflex of reaching for your person when something goes wrong. The reflex is still there even when the situation that created it is in question. I've been sitting with that as information about something, though I'm not yet sure what. Marcus Vane. He's 38, does commercial interior work around Savannah, got divorced 2 years ago from a marriage that had apparently been difficult in ways that left him in the kind of place where people make choices they wouldn't otherwise make. I know this because Natalie told me in one of the harder conversations, not to excuse anything. She was clear about that, just to give me the complete picture. He'd called her once after the hotel visit. She'd told him not to call again, and that had been the last of it. I've thought about him less than I expected to, which is either healthy processing or avoidance, and I've decided not to examine which. The mutual friend situation. Savannah is a city that feels larger than it is and behaves like a small town, and things travel. A few of our shared friends have reached out to me directly and without performing allegiance. A few have gone quiet in the way people go quiet when they're not sure which side of a thing they're supposed to be on. Our closest couple friends, people we'd had dinner with monthly for 4 years, handled it with the grace of people who've been through enough of their own things to know that the right response is presence without judgment. They came over on a Saturday with food and wine, and we talked about everything and nothing, and they stayed until midnight, and I was grateful for every minute. The inside of it. The first morning Natalie's things were truly gone. Not just her, but enough of her belongings that the house registered the absence geometrically, I lay in bed and ran the inventory. What day? What I had on. And then the weight came back in the sequence it's been coming back every morning since, arriving before I've fully decided to be awake. The house on Habersham Street is quieter than it was. Not the quiet of an empty house. It's not empty. I'm in it. But the specific quiet of a space that has been calibrated for 2 people and is running at half capacity. I've been learning the sounds of it alone. The specific way the floorboards in the hallway respond when the temperature drops at night, which I'd never noticed under the ordinary ambient noise of a shared life. The house is showing me things I hadn't been paying attention to. I found her reading glasses on the nightstand about a week in. The ones she kept there for the late-night reading she did when she couldn't sleep. Thin-framed, the specific prescription strength that meant they were useless to any other pair of eyes. I picked them up and sat with them for a moment, and then put them in the drawer where I've been putting things that I'm not ready to deal with. And I closed the drawer, and the drawer has been accumulating for 3 weeks. There's a coffee place on Whitaker Street called the Sentient Bean that Natalie and I used to walk to on Sunday mornings, a Savannah institution, the kind of place that has been there long enough to have accumulated its own mythology, where the regulars and the tourists exist in parallel, and the coffee is genuinely good, and the back patio has the specific quality of being outside but sheltered, the best of both. We'd gone probably 100 times. I went last Sunday alone, first time since everything, and I sat on the back patio, and I ordered what I always order, and I watched the Sunday morning Savannah light come down through the trees, and I thought about 8 years, and about AirDrop settings, and about a photo of our hallway that had been going to someone else, and I drank my coffee, and I got through the morning. I still reach for my phone to show her listings sometimes. I'll see a property that has something interesting about it, a historic detail, an unusual floor plan, the specific quality of a house that has its own personality, and my hand moves toward my phone before I remember that sharing it with her is more complicated now than it was 3 weeks ago. The reflex of 8 years of bringing her into my professional world runs on its own track and doesn't consult the current situation before initiating. I've caught it 4 times. I let the reflex get as far as opening the photo, and then I close it, and the next time the reflex runs again. The herbs in the kitchen window are still alive. I've been watering them every morning because they were there, and because the watering is a small, complete action that requires nothing of me except to do it. And some mornings the small, complete action is what I have to offer. Natalie would find this either touching or absurd, and I've been unable to determine which. And I've decided that the inability to determine it is itself information about something. Here is where I actually am. Natalie and I have spoken 8 times since she went to Claire's. For we're logistics, the mortgage, the account, the practical management of a shared financial life that continues regardless of personal circumstances. 3 were harder. 1, 5 days ago, was different from all the others. In the hard conversations, she said things I've been going through carefully since, the way I go through a market analysis before making a recommendation, not looking for what I want to find, but for what's actually there. She said there had been a quality to our last 2 years that she hadn't named clearly until she was trying to explain it to someone else. A quality of being competent partners rather than present ones, 2 capable people running the systems of a shared life with proficiency and decreasing actual contact with each other. She said she'd let this happen as much as she'd watched it happen, that she'd had the conversation she needed to have with me for at least a year and had chosen instead to manage the dissatisfaction in other ways. She said, what I did with it was wrong. But the dissatisfaction was real, and I should have brought it to you before I brought it anywhere else. I've been sitting with that. The dissatisfaction that was real and the direction she'd taken it. The 2 things as separate as she'd tried to present them, and also not fully separable, and my own responsibility in the conditions that had made the dissatisfaction available. I'm not making her choices mine. I'm trying to understand what was true in the marriage that I'd also been managing rather than addressing. The conversation 5 days ago was different because she asked me something she'd been not asking. She asked whether I was open, not committed, just open, to seeing someone together. A therapist. She'd found someone who worked specifically with couples in crisis, a woman on Habersham Street, and she wasn't asking me to decide anything except whether I was willing to have the conversations with some structure around them. She said, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything. I'm asking anyway because I think you deserve the honest version of what happened, and I'm not sure I can deliver it well without help. I told her I'd think about it. That was the honest answer, and it still is. I'm thinking about it. I've been seeing someone individually for 2 weeks. His name is Dr. Sam Osei. He has an office on Victory Drive, and he has caught me, in 2 sessions, doing the realtor thing, reading the surface, assessing the gap between stated and actual, analyzing the market rather than being in it. He said in our 2nd session, "You're describing your marriage like you're preparing a listing presentation. I'd like you to tell me what it felt like to live in it." I've been working on answering that. It turns out the answer is longer and less organized than a listing presentation and requires more time to develop, and he's given me the time. He said something in our 1st session that I wrote down and have looked at several times. In real estate, the comparable sales tell you what things have been worth. They don't tell you what they're worth now. The current value is its own question. I've been thinking about current value, about what the marriage is worth now, in this market, with this information. I haven't arrived at a number yet. I'm still doing the analysis. The house on Habersham Street is still the house it's always been. The specific quality of the light in the mornings, the floorboards that I'm learning to hear differently, the herbs in the window that are still alive because I've been watering them. Natalie chose every detail of how it looks, and I've been inside those choices for 8 years without fully accounting for the choosing. And I've been noticing the choices more carefully lately, room by room. The way you notice things when you're no longer certain how long you'll be in a place. The 3 photos are still in my camera roll. I haven't deleted them, and I haven't looked at them again, and I haven't decided what to do with them. They sit there in the roll the way things sit in the drawer, present, unresolved, waiting for a decision that hasn't been made yet. Her phone sent me 3 photos she wasn't ready to send, and in those 3 photos was everything I'd been choosing not to see for 4 months, and the specific grief of that. Not just what the photos showed, but the 4 months of my own deliberate not seeing, is the thing I come back to most in the quiet house on Habersham Street. Because the photos were her truth, and the not seeing was mine, and whatever comes next has to account for both. Tomorrow, a man goes to pick up his wife from her best friend's bachelorette weekend, and when he gets to the hotel, the front desk tells him she checked out 2 days ago.